We have a good time.
We have 4 members thus far.
Through the chair, you're live on HCAM TV.
Thank you, Bob. And it looks like we're nearing our quorum. So in the meantime, I will go ahead and read the remote meeting script once I find it on my computer again. Okay, here we go. Good evening. Welcome to the April 26th meeting of the Planning Board, Hopkinton Planning Board. My name is Mary Larson Marlowe. I'm Vice Chair, and I'll be chairing the meeting this evening. This open meeting of the Planning Board is being conducted remotely, consistent with the recently signed an act extending certain COVID-19 measures adopted during the state of emergency. This act includes an extension until April 1st. It's not April, is it beyond April 1st?
They changed it to July 15th.
Yes.
Sorry, I never got the updated version. July 15th, 2022 of the remote meeting provisions of the governor's March 12th, 2020 executive order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law. The new law has 2 major parts. First, the new law allows public bodies to continue providing live, adequate alternative means of public access to the deliberations of the public body instead of holding meetings in a place that is open and physically accessible to the public. Adequate alternative means may include, without limitation, providing access through telephone, internet, or satellite-enabled audio or video conferencing, or any other technology that enables the public to clearly follow the proceedings of the public body in real time. Second, the new law authorizes all members of a public body to continue participating in meetings remotely. The open meeting law's requirement that a quorum of the body and the chair be physically present at the meeting location remains suspended. For this meeting, the Planning Board is convening by video conference via Zoom app as posted in the town's web meeting calendar and the agenda identifying how the public may join. Additionally, this meeting may also be broadcast by HCAM through one of its many channels or platforms. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and that some attendees are participating by video conference, or all. Accordingly, be aware that others may be able to see you, and take care not to screen share your computer. Anything that you broadcast may be captured by the recording. I will now do a roll call of the members and staff. So, Fran.
Ready, I'm present.
Thank you. Jane.
Jane Moran present.
Ron.
Ron Prefer, present.
Thank you. We have Shahidul.
Shahidul Manan, present.
Is there anyone else? Do we have a quorum yet?
5, yes, right?
Including yourself, yes.
3, 4, 5. Good.
5.
That's good. And staff, John
Gilsich present.
and Stephanie
Stephanie Pemberton present.
and Phil.
Bill Paradis and Beta present.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. So hopefully a few more people will join us from the planning board membership, but I'm not sure if they're able to tonight. Right now, we have several items on the agenda, and we are going to change the order of these items. There's a few items that require input from Beta and from Phil, so we will do those first. They also are likely to be relatively short items. And then we will proceed with the Wilson Street solar landscaping discussion. And then the last item on the agenda prior to the minutes, approval of minutes, will be the Mbta Communities presentation. Okay. So the first one we will do is 1.3 on the agenda, a definitive subdivision plan endorsement for Turkey Ridge. And I did see the Beta letter dated the 26th today. I don't know if you've all had a chance to look at it, but John, you want to just summarize for us what we're looking at here and what we're doing?
Sure. So the subdivision, definitive subdivision plan was approved. And so the next step is to, once they've made all the changes that were required, provide a revised, updated, full set of plans in Mylar form that the board can endorse and that they can get recorded. So Beta has reviewed the plan set and said that there's only a couple things that are different, the street names and phasing plan. But otherwise, there's no issues and they see no problem with the board endorsing them. So the board just basically has to vote to endorse. Then you got to come into town hall again and sign a bunch of pages.
Okay, sounds good. Does anyone have any questions?
Through the
ahead.
chair.
Yeah,
So John, you had mentioned, and maybe this is directed toward Phil, a little bit different phasing plan than what was originally proposed. Could you maybe just expound on that a little bit?
I'll defer to Phil.
So I don't believe we discussed the phasing plan. This phasing plan was developed when they went through conservation. And it makes a lot of sense. So I have no issue with what they're proposing. So
Could you maybe talk a little bit about what they are proposing?
so let me see if I can bring up the. They propose to do the road, basically, and then the. Let me see if I can get to it. Sorry,
I'm bringing it up right now, Phil.
Okay. So yeah, so I think they wanted, we wanted to limit the amount of area they could clear at any particular time due to some of the projects that we've had. I'm less concerned about this site because it's pretty well draining soils. However, the Conservation Commission was pretty convinced that they wanted to, again, not allow clearing of the entire developed area at the same time. So I think if you go all the way to the end, the bottom plan. So yeah, as you can see that there's four phases. So the idea is to build the road first,
mhm.
and then all the drainage areas second, and then develop the parcels. So, which makes sense. So once they have all the hard infrastructure in, they can be able to better manage the runoff. But like this is not similar to the trails or anything in Legacy Farms, because the soils are much more suitable for infiltration than and probably contain a significantly lower amount of fines that would be easily suspended in stormwater runoff. So we have no issue with this.
Thank you for that. That's helpful.
Thank you, Fran. Any other questions from the board? Okay. Then I would like to entertain a motion to endorse this definitive subdivision plan for Turkey Ridge.
So moved.
So move.
Ron Prefer.
Second, Shahid Manan.
Okay, I've got a motion and a second. Now we'll do a roll call. Fran, how do you vote?
Randy Young, yes.
Ronnie,
Ron Prefer, yes.
Jane,
Jane Moran, yes.
Shahidul,
Shahid Manan, yes.
Rob,
Rob Benson, yes.
Dave,
Dave Paul, yes.
and Mary Larson Marlowe is a yes. So we all have to remember to go into town hall tomorrow and sign all these Mylars. What are the hours that you're going to be available? Someone is going to be available up in planning department.
8 to 4:30 tomorrow and Thursday, and then 8 to noon or sorry, 8 to 2 on Friday.
Okay,
So because today is a Tuesday, tonight is our late night, so we are not going to be open late the rest of the week.
And how many signatures do you require?
5.
Okay.
so that's most of us.
Yeah, it's just trying to get in there. This
Yeah.
is my final exam week.
Oh, yeah, got it. Okay, well, thank you very much. And that closes the Turkey Ridge. And let's see what's next on our agenda. That will be the Franklin Road decommissioning bond. We do have a beta letter summarizing their comments. And I don't know if all of you have had a chance to review it, but it's brief, but to the point. And this is just a required part of any solar plan, that a decommissioning plan needs to be put into place and approved by the board. Is there someone here representing the development? Doesn't seem to be. No?
Pedro Rodriguez is here.
Sorry,
Oh,
I thought it was,
okay.
Sorry, I
Hi,
thought-
Pedro.
hey, how's it going? Sorry, I thought it was muted.
Okay, thank you. So,
Yeah.
Phil, would you like to summarize your comments in the letter?
Yeah, so I mean, it's generally in good condition. There are a few comments relative to kind of the nature of the narrative, in that, you know, the idea of restoring the property was not to restore previously paved areas that are being removed. D1, so you know, we just want to make sure that there's a clear definition of what the topsoil and seeding will be in D2. Looks like the battery area was not included in the work items in table 1. Yeah, the removal of the stormwater BMPs, which will not be necessary if the array is removed. Trees and shrubs and consistent with native vegetation in D5. The substantive issues are relative to the D6, 7, and 8. And that's, unfortunately, this project would, if the town has to do it, they have to use prevailing wages, which are significantly higher than what the applicant has proposed. So we would recommend that they update that. We also recommend, over 25 years span, inflation is more likely to be closer to 3% than 2%. So we recommend they increase that. And then also, it's very difficult to predict the salvage value of items 25 years out. So unfortunately, we always recommend that the salvage value not be included in the bond amount. So those are the comments. So.
Okay, thank you very much, Phil. And I agree with the comments from Beta, and would expect that, you know, we would see a revised version. John, do you have any further comments beyond what Phil has given us?
No further comments.
Okay, and does anyone else on the planning board have any comments on this?
Through the chair, just a quick point of clarification, Phil, if I may. For the salvage value, isn't it straight line depreciation? Where would there be any salvage value after 25 years?
I think that's what Phil is suggesting, that we would remove the salvage value from this calculation. Yeah.
Got it. Yeah. Thank you. Just wanted to clarify.
Correct.
So, Mr. Rodriguez?
Yeah,
Can you
no,
make revisions? Yep.
Yeah, perfect. No, I went over right before the meeting. I have no problem making all these revisions.
Great. Okay, so we will
to the
look
chair.
for the revised version. Go ahead, Phil.
Mary,
I'm sorry.
just a quick question, maybe back to Beta on this, is the expected inflation rate. Did you mention you were going to kind of have them bump that from 2 to 3?
Correct.
Right? are we underselling that a little bit, just given the current state of affairs? Or I know that, forecasting the future inflation rate is
Oh, well,
a
I
moving
mean,
target, but
previous to this year, if you had run inflation rate, it would have probably been below 3. But over a 25-year span, we do have spikes like this, like we're experiencing now. So we would expect it to be higher on average than the 2%, right? So I don't expect our inflation rate to be at 8% for any extended amount of time, but. So I'm not an analyst, but I definitely think it should be more than 2%.
I would agree with that. I mean, I think even 3%, who knows what it's going to be over a 25-year period. It's throwing darts blindfold, but just to be cautious, I would say on that number.
Through the chair, I think, Fran, you made a good point. I was just curious, is there any standard practice for this, Phil, for this type of calculation, what we use average?
I typically recommend 3%. So I don't know what the standard practice is. We do this for many towns. We've done many of these, and these are the big 3 comments relative to prevailing wage, inflation rate, and salvage value. So we say the same thing on all of them, and they pretty much get accepted across the board. So
Yeah.
Okay, anyone else from the planning board? And-
I think Pedro, I see his hand up.
And yes, Mr. Rodriguez.
Yeah, I was just gonna kind of echo what Phil said. This is the first decommissioning estimate that we're getting approved this year.
Mhm.
But before that, it's always been the standard to have a 2% for the inflation rate for all the projects that I did in Massachusetts, all the projects that we're doing in New York, in Connecticut. It's always been 2% for 25 years, except for this year that I'm getting feedback from towns to increase it to 3%, which I have no problem doing it here.
Okay. Thank you. Anyone else? No? Okay. So we will look for the revised version and then we'll be able to vote on that, right, John? Is that?
Yes, I mean, if somebody wants to do the calculation right now, you could vote on an amount.
No,
or
there
we
was written things in the decommissioning plan that need to be changed and revised.
Right, so I guess there could be 2 votes, right? Because you don't need to necessarily approve the decommissioning plan, you need to approve the decommissioning estimate. And then the decommissioning plan, if Beta is okay with it, is just in the file. However, if you want to go through that process and approve the whole thing as a package, that's fine too.
I think that makes the most sense to have it written the way that we would approve that final plan with the final estimate. It should be
Vote
very
is better
quick-
than 2.
Quick thing to do, so. All right,
Yeah, fine by me. That works.
okay, sounds good.
So just
Thanks, Gary.
through the chair,
Mhm.
the next planning board meeting, I spoke to Gary, or I emailed Gary about this, was supposed to be May 16th, but that's election day.
Okay,
So this was something else we're going to talk about. We are looking to move the next meeting date to either the 18th or the 19th. So just for Mr. Rodriguez's information, it would probably be that week.
Okay, perfect. I will pay attention to the calendar.
okay,
And then the board can decide which day is best.
all right. Shall do. Okay.
Thank
So
you.
this closes this issue. Thank you very much, Mr. Rodriguez. And we are now on to the Wilson Street Solar Landscaping Plan. And John, I haven't opened any of these as official public hearings or anything like that. Is this one?
These are not public hearings.
These are not public hearings. I didn't think so.
Nope.
So, okay. Otherwise you would have stopped me anyhow. Good. Okay. just to give people a little bit of history, about half of us were on the planning board when this all began with Wilson Street. It was a special permit was approved in 2019, is that right? And then some revisions in 2021. And a very extensive landscaping plan was put together with the original applicants and with a great deal of input from abutters. And a lot of attention paid because this is a scenic road on Wilson Street where one of the entrances to this solar farm is occurring. So it was not possible not to have an entrance on Wilson Street the way that this was designed, and because of wetlands crossings and so on. So that's just a little bit of history to catch everybody up to the same place. And my understanding is that right now, Grasshopper is in the construction phase and doing some of the initial landscaping. And there are differences in the landscaping being done compared to the original plan. So does that sum it up well? Okay. And John, how do you suggest we start with this?
So this is kind of a complex and messy subject. I'm bringing this before the board because I've tried working with the applicant to revise the plan that they've submitted. What you're seeing on your screen is the plan that was approved. Let me share the plan that was submitted and has been installed. So there's some background with all of this. So this is what was installed. So very different than what was approved. There were certain conditions that had to be met moving forward in this permit that the applicant did not meet. They were supposed to provide. So if you remember in the amendment hearing with the solar special permit, the question was asked several times, what plants are going to be located where and how many of them are there going to be? Because they had a planting schedule, but they also had a note that said all of these plantings will be determined appropriate on site or whatever it was. So then they couldn't give us an answer as to how many of each species were going to be located where.
Mm-hmm.
And so part of the decision was they were going to give us a revised plan when they did know that information. They did not do that. They spoke to the neighbors, Mr. Cutter on the north and Mr. Shambo on the south. And these neighbors did their best to try and figure out what to do, but it wasn't their responsibility to make that decision. But Grasshopper went and basically took that as an approval and installed what you see on this plan, aside from these plantings down here. So it's essentially arborvitae and arborvitae. And they haven't planted these or these. So I was brought on site after the plantings were done. Very confused as to why they were done without the plan submitted. We've tried to work with them to figure out a way to mesh the plan that they had approved and this plan. And all we've been able to get from them is some more plantings up here, these 6 green giants, these 6 green giants, and then these 4 white pines. So at this point, I kind of admittedly threw my hands up and said, the planning board needs to take a look at this, discuss it with you, and figure out a way forward because we're not getting anywhere. Because all they seem to be doing is just adding green giants. They've also applied for, I don't remember what the name of it is, but a Massachusetts certification for native plantings and pollinator plantings. And the Massachusetts department reached out to me because they said that the town gave them approval to use arborvitae instead of native plantings, which obviously never happened. So it's kind of a mess right now, and we're trying to figure out a way forward. I am trying to avoid the situation where they have to rip out all these plantings, but if that's what it comes to, then that's what it comes to, because there's an approved landscaping plan that they clearly haven't followed.
Right.
So that's kind of where we stand with this. So I was looking for the planning board to give them some guidance as to how to move forward with this, give the neighbors a chance to vent their frustration and see if there's any path forward on how to do this appropriately. Unfortunately, I don't believe they are on this call.
Oh, great. So we can give our comments to the air.
Yes.
Basically, this is my opinion. They should be following the original plan. And if they want to deviate from the original plan, they should come to us and tell us exactly what they want to deviate from. And the original plan, we spent countless hours on the original plan. And for us to spend countless hours again going through tree by tree exactly what they have included and what they have not included is not the purpose here. They should be following what was approved, what the conditions were, and not substituting in things that were not approved. There was also a number of items on the original plan that talked about a certified landscape specialist or wetland specialist approving certain things. It talked about coordinating with the abutters, and it wasn't just these two abutters that you mentioned, but also the ones across the street. And it was to ensure year-round screening. So yeah, this is serious, and I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but I'm doing it for the public record. So go ahead, Ronnie. You have a comment?
Yeah, through the chair. So I was not part of the planning board when this was brought forth, so I'm rather a novice on this, but I do have a question, very simple. So obviously this is, I think you said was Carpenter was the organization? Is that the name there? Grasshopper Carbon. Okay, sorry, Grasshopper. Were they informed about today's meetings regarding this being brought forth?
Yes. So I spoke to Ahmed before I was on vacation last week. So before I went on vacation, I said, is this your final plan that you want to present to the planning board on April 26th? And he said, unless there's something else you want me to do. I said, there are many other things that I want you to do, but I am looking for a final plan from you that we can discuss. And he did not respond to me, but he was notified that it was on the 26th.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Other planning board members? Go ahead, Fran.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I think you'll probably get to this, but I believe some of the abutters are present in this meeting here this evening. I would love to get their perspective on it. I would also just like to kind of echo your comments as well. You know, it seems like this is not, and John's kind of spoken to this, not the first time that they've kind of decided to kind of do their own thing with regards to this particular plan. And I think, you know, the fact that they're not present here this evening, again, I'll use positive intent, maybe something came up, but clearly it would have served them in their best interest to be here this evening. And I think it speaks volumes that they're not here. And I would look to this body to really enforce to the degree that we can, you know, the plans that were originally submitted. And if they continue to be in violation of those plans, you know, look at what alternatives or what means do we have at our disposal in order to get them to be in compliance.
Thank you, Fran. Dave?
Yeah, hi, Madam Chair, thank you. I have a question specific to the arborvitaes. I didn't catch what John was saying with the state. Were we saying that we didn't approve the arborvitaes? Because I thought we did approve the green giants, which are tick resistant, and deer resistant.
So I should look up what the organization is. They are a organization, and I want to say they're at the state level as well, that certifies that certain developments are native and pollinator friendly planting designed. They did have some arborvitae, but a lot of the plantings that were proposed in the other plan were native plantings like red maples and obviously now I'm blanking on all the other species, but
There were,
native plantings.
I think there
was
were
just-
12 arborvitae, green giant arborvitae, but the rest of them were witch hazel,
So-
white pine, red oak.
So just to put this in perspective, when I had a meeting to try and really get this through to their into their heads as to how this is inappropriate for a planting plan, the number of species they originally were approved for was about 500, and they are proposing about 100 plantings. So significantly less than what they were proposing to begin with, and almost exclusively arborvitae in this, whereas there were few arborvitae in the previous approved plan. The organization that is doing the certification was just looking to say, okay, well, if the town is okaying your use of arborvitae, that's fine. We can still move forward. But I spoke to the woman who was managing that, just to give her an idea that this is a full scale switch of arborvitae from native species to only arborvitae. And I don't think she was aware of that. So that was eye-opening to her. And I just wanted to call that out, because it seems like they are not only making the switch with us or misrepresenting what is going to be on the site with us, but with other organizations.
Thank you for that clarification.
Jane, you're next.
Oh, thank you, Mary. I can't tell you how disappointed I am in this arborist, or this developer who came forward and just put in these arborvitaes. I was there and we spent so much time talking about different types of species, rhododendrons, azaleas, all kinds of different flowering plants that would not only be friendly for the environment, but to beautify for the neighbors who have already sacrificed so much. And this speaks volumes to some developers who just come in and kind of do what they only want to do. They give the nod and the approval, and then they just go ahead and do what they want to do. And the planning board, since I've been on it, has been very fortunate to work with so many developers that have gone out of their way to make sure that they follow all of the planning board's recommendations. And this developer, it's almost like a slap in the face, especially to the neighbors in that neighborhood that spent so much time and energy and thought into what would work. And the plan was workable. And then to see this come, it's really insulting. And I would almost suggest maybe a walk around. Maybe the planning boards could do a site walk and figure out what's going on. And I would echo also, I think it was Fran who said, what is it the planning board can do to hold this developer accountable? Is it fines? Is it tearing up these arborvitaes and putting them somewhere else? I mean, I'm sure they're beautiful plants and they could go somewhere useful along the road, God only knows. But there was so much thought that went into what should go where. And it was going to be state of the art as far as developments go. And then to see this come in through the back door, I'm just really, really concerned.
Thank you, Jane. I'd also like to point out one other thing, because this can't just be about the landscaping plan, specifically number of trees and placement of trees or landscaping, but the scenic road itself. It appears from the plan, although it's not entirely clear to me, but I certainly did see pictures taken by abutters as well. I know on our site walk back in 2019, I personally took pictures of the cart path and the proposed place of the access road. And we talked about it being only a certain amount wide, and that was all of the stone wall that they were going to remove along the scenic road. And it appears, again, I'm not entirely sure exactly what happened there, but it appears that it was widened. And that has to be corrected if that was in fact done. And there needs to be additional screening placed along the road. And it needs to be restored to what it was intended to be. And it was intended to be quite invisible by the point at which the construction was completed. Okay. Yes, go ahead, Dave.
So I just, I'm hearing a lot of feedback about how wrong this was, and to your point, to Fran's point about what our options are. Is it possible for us to put a work stop order in until we get them in to talk to them?
So, I mean, everything's constructed. Everything, they're not even on the site. It's basically done. The way that the board can, they still need to get the occupancy permit before they start using it. And that's kind of the card that we're holding. But I mean, there's no work to stop.
Okay.
But we can ensure that the occupancy permit does not take place until these things are corrected.
Right.
Is that
Yeah,
something
I mean,
that we can do?
they need to construct it to the plans in order to get the occupancy permit, and they haven't done
Right.
that.
And they have not done that, clearly. Okay, so we don't have to take a vote to make that happen. That is already happening. No occupancy permit right now. Okay, Jane, go ahead.
Yeah, one last thought. I know there was a lot of conversation about pollinators and other things that went under the solar panels when they were building this out. So I'm also wondering if they just were flagrantly violating the planting. What is it that they're doing under the solar panels? Has there been an inspection there?
So there hasn't, because it's now getting the spring. So they didn't have a growing season in between when they constructed it and this point right now. So if you remember there was a lot of concern about the way that their panels were set up, that is there going to be anything growing under there. So we had a contingency plan that's going to be in effect because it's part of the approved permit. So there's, I think, 4 steps that they need to go through to make it successful or to ensure that it's successful. And so we're obviously going to be monitoring that.
Okay. And I'd also like to see us, if there is not satisfactory action on this within a particular period of time, that we need to think about hiring at their cost landscapers to do this properly. So if they're not going to do it, we'll get it done at their cost. So just a thought to throw out, but and I know that there's a lot of things we need to have in place to make that happen. But
Madam Chair, may I ask a question?
Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you. So I wasn't present in the original discussion and approval, but obviously I echo all the sentiment and all the insights and remarks that my colleagues are expressing. Obviously, there was non-compliance, and then the non-responsiveness and also kind of doing the right thing attitude is not very much visible in this scenario. So one thing I wanted to understand, was there any formal communication that procedurally we need to do or we have done so far? I know, John, you mentioned you personally was there, you visited, you gave the feedback and emails, but I'm thinking, is there any procedural thing that we need to do to communicate the non-compliance clearly? And then obviously we've been talking about various actions to explore what are the tools that we have to make them compliant, or is it cease and desist? I don't know what the right appropriate measure is, but obviously we need to make sure that the discipline and the compliance is respected.
John, I think that's directed toward you.
So procedurally, I mean, I don't know what can be done. The board can write a letter demanding that they appear before the board, which was supposed to be this case, and we can set it up for the next meeting in May to discuss this or to defend this proposal or to answer questions. It's not really a procedural thing, but it's something that the board can do to assert some authority. I'd have to talk to the zoning enforcement officer and see what punitive type measures we can take that are not withholding the certificate of occupancy, that are in addition to that or alternative to that.
Okay.
I'm not aware. I mean, a cease and desist won't work because there's, again, no work going on. And they're not connected to the grid, so it's not producing any energy. So there's nothing we can do there either. So short of removing everything and decommissioning the whole site, at this point, I don't really know what other options there are.
Okay. If you could begin some discussions with the zoning enforcement officer and legal counsel if necessary, to explore our options, that would be great, because I think that will be helpful for the next time that we meet and we meet with them. I'd also like to open the floor to Mr. Cutter, Mr. Shambo, and any other abutters who are here.
May I, through the chair, may I ask one question first?
Sure, go ahead.
Is there a bond on this property? And if so, how much?
I'd have to look. I don't know how much.
Okay, fair enough. Because I was following up with what was said prior. I think we need to be a little bit more brash than a passive here. An invitation to our next meeting should not be what we are asking. It is a mandatory attendance at our next meeting. And I think that we need to push a little bit of power here because, again, I was not here when this was put forth, but obviously we have a carrot that we're dangling over them, the certificate of occupancy, but I'd rather them come here and explain themselves and, instead of us just, wasting time, but like hearsay. And I'd love to know what's actually going on in their mind and why they felt that was necessary not to follow the rules. So that's my 10 cents.
Thanks. Mr. Cutter, Mr. Shambo, would either of you like to speak?
So this is Tom Shambo.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
So I live at 15 Wilson Street. I've been here since July of 1995. Been in town since February of 1992, so a little over 30 years. I want to thank the board for all the work that you've done, particularly on this project that we've been in and out of and having discussions on for 5 years or more. You guys have been great, and I thank you for the comments that you've just recently shared. Throughout all the meetings, I think I've been pretty reasonable and tried to articulate what made sense and how the project could move forward for the town, for the scenic road, for the butters, as well as the developers. And I'll just tell you that at the beginning of my comments here, I want you to know that I'm pretty upset about what's going on here. And so I hope to caution my upsetness with, or my frustration with my comments. But if I don't, I'll apologize ahead of time. So we've been in and out, in and around and doing things. And I thank you for the great work that, you've done so far on this project. But I want to point out, and the map that was up there, I don't consider that a map. I don't consider it a plan. I consider it maybe, a sketch, other than maybe a little bit better than with crayons. It doesn't say where the plantings are going to go. It doesn't say how far away from the buffer it's going to be. It doesn't say how far away from my property line things are going to be. It's a fair bit different than the original plannings, screening plans showed and were approved. And I have no idea who put this together. Is it a wetland scientist? Is it a landscape architect? Is it someone with any kind of a degree, in this kind of work? I just don't know. It feels like it's just thrown together and said, hey, we're going to put some more plantings here, and there you go. But along where those plantings are, at least as it relates to my property line and the 75-foot buffer that we had agreed to, I'd like to point out a few things. because there wasn't an element of erosion control and sediment control or a silt fence around the buffer area, but it was everywhere else in the project, I think the people understood where they could go and where they couldn't go. But in the buffer area, it was just a couple of stakes here and there that showed the 75-foot buffer. So I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt, the different workers that may have been in there cutting trees and doing work. But I had specifically pointed out, had Chuck Claddick out and had Mike Shepard out to look at and look down the property line of that 75-foot buffer, not the property line, the 75-foot buffer line, and see that there were 5 or 6 trees inside of the buffer area that were cut down. And those 5 or 6 trees could have helped with the screening. So I pointed out because of the negative effect it had, and it, in effect, pushed the buffer from 75 feet maybe back to 65 or 70 feet. In addition, if you do come for a site walk, and I hope you do, they have taken boulders from the project and they've placed them inside the 75-foot buffer, thus not allowing for ground vegetation to come up, not allowing for other trees to come up, and maybe ruining or hurting the roots of the trees that are there. It looks terrible. And it doesn't allow them to plant any plantings near the fencing because these boulders are all placed on the back side of my property and on the entrance side of the road going into the property itself. So it's effectively been reduced the screening of 75 feet back to something. I'm not even going to say what it is. And the definition from the town of the buffer definition is a lot contains, buffer areas shall remain in their natural state. And if in the opinion of the planning board, the current natural state is insufficient to adequately separate and or screen the site from abutting properties, additional trees, shrubs, plantings, and fencing may be required. They didn't ask anybody. They just placed those boulders there. In addition, they had 5, 6, 7 trucks parked in that buffer area and on the lawn reclamation area during the construction of the project at the beginning. Right now, Eversource or NSTAR is out there trying to cut the road so that they can connect the electrical, or at least put the workings in for the electrical under the street. And they have an earth mover up in the buffer. So nobody's paying attention to this buffer area, which I think is a huge mistake. My suggestion is we do get a site walk. Maybe we have a land surveyor come back and put stakes in so that we can see exactly where that buffer is supposed to be and what boulders are inside or outside of it. And, plant trees within the buffer as opposed to them wanting to plant trees on my property when I'd rather not happen. I'd rather they take care of it in the buffer or on the construction site itself. As it relates to the entranceway, I sent pictures in of other projects that have been done. If you go all the way to the Wilson Street on the Ashland side, it's called House Street. They did a very nice job landscaping, good neighbors, black fence. I don't know whether there was argument that went on there or not, but it looks nice. When you look at the one on East Main Street, the entranceway, you can't even see those green electrical boxes that are there. They got fencing, they got trees, and the road going in is quite narrow. Ours looks like you can put a tank through the thing on a scenic road. It just looks awful. And so I'd like to ask that you guys, if you can, do a site visit, see what we see, and let's hold the developer accountable, to what they had agreed to in the plans themselves. And I just want to note that in the decision and conditions of the planning board, I guess it's called the application for the project, sections 2, 3, and 27 talk about vegetation screening and plantings and how they'll meet ahead of time with people and get approval, submit a plan, then build to that plan. And then in the non-foliage season, come back and see where maybe other trees might be needed and planted or other screenings. Maybe they don't need trees. Maybe they can put a screening fence up along their existing chain link fence that would help. But something needs to be done because it looks terrible. So just respectfully, I thank you for allowing me to have some comments here at this session.
Thank you very much. Mr. Cutter, are you interested in speaking?
I apologize for interjecting again. Is it possible through the chair to ask Mr. Chambeau a couple questions?
Sure, go ahead, Ron.
The first question I have, are you north or south of the property in question here? I'm looking at the map.
I don't know what map you're looking at, but
Well, are you north or south of the entrance?
I'm south of the entrance.
South of the entrance. Okay, so I was looking at the lawn reclamation area of that one
Yes.
there. That's what I thought. A second question. You mentioned something that Eversource is doing work there currently.
Yes.
Okay, that's something I think we should come back to after. But thank you.
Through the town board, I think it was that they're just cutting the road and they're putting the pipe in, and I believe they're putting the wiring in underneath the road. I specifically attended that meeting and asked them to be sure that they didn't allow the applicant to connect and start allowing electricity to go through, even though that they were doing this work.
Through the chair, they're doing work in the road, in the right of way.
But as Mr. Shambo said, they're parking.
Correct,
trucks.
but they're not doing work on the site.
Yeah.
I believe the power lines are on the opposite side of the road, so they needed to get under the road to connect the power lines.
Yep.
But is everything, or are we close to having everything connected? Because at a certain point, although we have that certificate of occupancy trump card, I'm concerned that it may be a moot point, because if everything's already wired up, then they're like, well, we'll do what we want anyways.
They cannot interconnect without the certificate of occupancy.
Okay, so the last wire cannot be connected.
They can't turn it on, basically, without the C of O.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. I don't see anyone else's hand or interest in speaking. Oh, yes, Ed, are you having trouble unmuting? Maybe John can unmute you.
I can't unmute anybody.
Okay.
I can ask Ed to unmute.
The lower left corner. Mr. Cutter?
How are we doing?
There we go.
Wow, that's the most technologically advanced I've done anything. Somebody earlier, perhaps it was you, said you couldn't be more upset at what is going on. Well, I think both Tom and I are going to join you in that. He did such a wonderful job about dealing, I think, with all the issues that I will limit what I have to say. The digging went on the road. I think that started yesterday. There was some more work there today. I believe that some of the work is off the street. If you were going north on the street and you went by Tom's house, it would be to the left. And I saw that on the ground there were these big pieces of metal that you apparently use so you can drive over a hole in the ground. So they were doing some work right on the site. So I wonder if that might be a point of leverage to tell them they should stop that, or in some way stop it so they'll feel the heat on this. What has happened in the entryway and the view from the street is really a tragedy. It's hard to think of how they could have made it more ugly. The plans had provided that it would be 18 feet wide and then skinny down to 20. The 18 feet would be a paved area, and then it would skinny down to 12 feet where it would be just stone and whatever. It's way out of line with that. You look down, and when I look at it, I think of a construction site, or even, gosh, getting into a dump. It's just terrible. The plan that they supplied that is still on the screen, if I've got it right, it's almost offensive that they should give us something like that that tells us nothing. It has no indications of elevations. The land moves up quite a bit. I'm on the northern side, and if you go from the northern side to where Tom is, to where the panels are that are closer to him, there's maybe a 10-foot increase there. So putting a small tree way back near me isn't going to do much good. On that plan, there's a mention about I can't say it's not big enough, but additional, I think it says apparatus, additional area. I don't know what that means. Frankly, I asked John, and he, bless him, he didn't know what that meant either, because there's no definition of, there's nothing here that you can bite into and get an idea of what they're really doing. You know, the plans require there to be a wetlands scientist or a landscape architect. And I looked up to see architects are supposed to have 1 or 2 degrees, and scientists supposed to have some kind of credentials. I have no confidence in anything they have done so far, including plantings. I don't know if they're too tight. There was discussion of the plantings in the northern area. And there was supposed to be they talked about a berm, not a single row, but a berm with staggered plantings. So you might have them 4 or 6 feet apart in one row, and then, odd numbers going back and covering in that way. They didn't do any of those things. The project manager told me, and I might have been naive, he said, oh, we're going to do everything it says on the plan and more. Well, we found out that wasn't quite so. I think that whoever mentioned it, that we should be retaining at the developer's cost, some professional people to look at how to do this in the best way, especially for the entranceway, which, Tom and I are bothered by our specific needs, but we're also bothered, and neighbors are terribly upset about the eyesore that's here. This used to be a pretty little area, and I guess I'd introduce, we've been here since 2000, and have never had any hesitancy about the choice to come to a rural sort of country road in a funny place, and with good neighbors, and it's grown up and it's become even more pleasant than it was when we came in, except for the solar farm. I would have kidded if I got to give my official talk and say that I thought we were so far along that all it took was that somebody goes and, follows the plan and it's going to be done. And I said, I was at that point going to attempt to know and love the solar farm and get over how I felt about it because of the injury I thought it did to a lot of us and the detriment of the neighborhood. But we were ready to accept that. That was the trade, and it got done. And it was approved by the board, and the board looked out for our interests. And as Tom indicated, we very much appreciate that. I think, I don't want to get into too much little detail, but if you look at the northern plantings, what was on the upper side of that, where the panels are just a few, the plan said there was supposed to be a total of 64 evergreens just there. And the evergreens were not all arborvitae. None of them were arborvitae. There was supposed to be blue spruce and holly and a few others, but it's almost as if they said that heck with it, and they just disregarding us, and that's really quite offensive. So I think that's about all I'm going to vent for now. Oh, and I don't know whether or not they ever finally got the scenic permit. I think they filed for that, and John might know, but I think there are things still to be done there, including maybe 60 feet of the stone wall to be replaced and work to be done that would replace some of the trees that Tom mentioned right in the entryway. If somebody knows whether, I don't think they've been given that. So I think there should be still decent leverage for the town, including under a new condition that John put into the 2021 permit all the ones that were in the 2019 permit have been retained, and they all required prior approval, and no planting should have occurred. And at some point, I know specifically they were aware of that. I think that they were aware of it before I knew about it specifically, but I know at some point it was specifically that they were aware of it. And they just disregarded that, made a mockery about the whole process in which the town had put in so much investment and time, and so had the neighbors. And it's really upsetting that they treated in this fashion. I was mentioning the added new condition in section F2 of the 2021 plan, and that gave the planning board additional latitude if it thought that a design was not sufficient to really protect neighboring parcels from having to view the array, that it could be under that procedure. And I think it said that if they don't comply with that, they're not going to get a certificate of compliance. So I'm sorry we're in the mess, and very much appreciate that the board sees it this way and will do its best to remedy the situation. I think that's about it for me today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Cutter. I certainly agree with a lot of what you're saying. John, I would like us to document in a letter, but we need to circulate it to the board and just make sure we have it the right, it covers all the right things. But I do want to see the scenic road restored, the stone walls, and to the original plan in terms of the width of the road and the screening that needs to be put in place that was destroyed during the construction period, and then the buffer 75-foot buffer around Mr. Shambo's property, as well as the landscaping that was originally in the design, and it has to be, it has to be a professional landscaper that we're talking to from the developer. So I was just wondering what kind of steps you would suggest that we take. I think we need to document a bunch of this, prior to our next discussion with the developer. But I certainly think that they can be told to come to the next meeting, because I think we have time to document this. Jane, you had also raised your hand. Go ahead.
Sure. I was going to suggest a couple of things that if we do a site walk, I would like to see these folks attend the site walk so that they can walk us through what they did and what it was that we expected. Number two, and this might be something your expertise, Mary, as far as ZBA goes, how is it that these developers can go ahead and do all this stuff without somebody coming in, just like with a building, just like with, someone coming in and checking in on their progress? We don't have that for planting, evidently. How, I don't know. This is your baby, Mary.
This is actually outside of the scope of zoning advisory committee or anything like that, but it's a process that takes place among the staff and the zoning enforcement officer and so on. And John would be able to explain it better, what the process is in terms of
Yeah, so what is the process now? And I'm looking forward to having a further conversation about how we can improve on that going forward, so that things like this don't happen again.
So
it seems to be such a flagrant violation.
Yeah, so through the chair, the zoning enforcement officer is in charge of reviewing projects that are under construction, and we put it as a condition in every decision that we have. We can hire a third party to do the inspections. We'll usually do that for like subdivision roads. Stuff like this, we usually don't have a third party come and inspect because it's essentially clearing the land and then installing screws that attach solar panels to the ground. So it's not as involved as another type of development. The issue here is there was a step that they missed or ignored. They were supposed to submit a plan to me to review prior to installing the planting plan or into installing the plants of that plan. They didn't do that. So I didn't even know they were planting these things until I got called. I think actually either Tom or Ed called me and said, hey, what's going on with this? So, they missed a step that was critical in this process. And now we're trying to backtrack and correct their error. So, I mean, that's where this fell apart, to be honest. I don't know if an inspector would have seen this because they had already put all the panels in when they did the planting. So the inspector wouldn't have been on site for this. They need to let us know when they're doing these types of things, and they didn't.
So going forward, I'm just wondering if there's something we can do, some steps that could ensure that this doesn't happen again.
So at the risk of being too micromanaging, you put a stipulation in each condition that has a deadline prior to building permit, prior to this permit. All these things need to be done, and so they can't get the next permit. And we usually have a little bit of faith in the developer that the process is going to go smoother, and so we don't put that deadline in each and every condition. But maybe that's the process that we need to take.
Lessons learned.
Right. I mean, the problem is for the developers who don't do this, it's an added cost, and you battle with the trying to be developer friendly while trying to not have this happen, and it's always a delicate balancing act. I mean, I don't want to say good things about one developer and bad things about another, but the experience we've had concerning Native American resource areas is vastly different on this site versus another site that was on this agenda earlier. And the tribal historic preservation officer reached out to me today and expressed those same sentiments. So there's only so much we can do when the developer is not going to pull their weight.
But we can find them for
Potentially. I don't know how we are empowered to find them for certain things.
So perhaps that's something that you can discuss with town council offline.
I will talk to the zoning enforcement officer and see what tools we have in our toolbox.
Good. All
But
right.
I just want to make one thing 100% clear. There's a question. If we get to the end and they request their power to be turned on, the certificate of occupancy, we can withhold that until every single thing has been met, all of the concerns of the planning board and the two fine gentlemen who spoke earlier today, correct?
So it depends. That's the answer that I'm always going to give.
Okay.
The planning board does not withhold anything. Planning board doesn't issue a certificate of occupancy. The building official does. They can withhold the certificate of occupancy if the development is not built according to the plans that were approved. So in this case, with the landscaping, they have not built it to the approved plans. The neighbors and the butters, unfortunately, do not have approval authority. So they cannot say, yes, it's satisfactory to me. The board needs to do that on their behalf. But the agreement essentially was, if you build this approved plan as it's approved, that would be sufficient. They have not done that. So that's where the planning board has their power.
So I apologize, I didn't write it down. So who has the final approval? Who gives the certificate of occupancy?
The building inspector, the building inspector, zoning enforcement officer, director of municipal inspections, same person.
Inspector.
And
Okay.
and
Is it possible to have him come to our next meeting as well, so we could discuss what our concerns are and where we lie? Because I'd love to have his or her input on this prior to going forward in any sense.
I can ask. I don't know if he's going to come to the meeting. Usually starts early in the morning and doesn't stay until 7 o'clock. So
Okay.
we can definitely.
A request is a request. I would love to have that individual partake in these discussions.
I would agree.
Most of you are familiar with Mike Shepard. He's the assistant building inspector, former
and he's not
building
shy.
inspector. Yeah, and he would probably attend, but I can ask Chuck and Mike.
That would be great.
Thank you. And then make sure that the developer knows that we would like them at the next meeting. The next meeting we are talking about would have to be on either Tuesday. Did you say Tuesday, May 17th, or Wednesday, May 18th, or not on Tuesday?
It could be Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday. So the issue is with the rescheduling of that May 16th meeting, because of the election, the application for a scenic road permit on Chamberlain Wayland would fall outside, the meeting would fall outside of the deadline for a hearing. So the deadline for a hearing, we kind of have a small window. With the advertisement required, we can't hold the meeting earlier than May 12th, but with the deadline, it was submitted on April 20th. With the deadline being May 20th, we can't have the meeting any later than May 19th. So we really have between May 12th and May 19th to hold a meeting. So 17th, 18th, and 19th should work for our purposes. But just to let you know about conflicts, 17th is a select board meeting, 18th is the Upper Charles Trail Committee meeting, and the 19th is the Hopkinton Democratic Committee, Town Committee, and the School Committee meeting. Nothing stops us from having a meeting at the same time as those boards, but just want you all to be aware.
John, through the chair, I had penciled in May 16 for our planning board meeting. Would that not work?
So that's election day.
Oh, so that's not going to happen.
That's why I can't work. Yeah.
I just X that off.
Okay, so
through the chair, the other option is we request a continuation of the deadline to May 23rd. However, the applicant may not grant that, and then we're stuck in a tough spot.
Through the chair, how about something in the week of May 9?
So we can't hold the meeting earlier than May 12th because we wouldn't be able to notice it per statute requirements by then.
and this is all about the Chamberlain Wayland Scenic Road
Correct.
application? Okay.
Correct.
So I guess you're looking at May 17 or
17th, 18th,
18
or
or 19.
But why couldn't we have it on May 12th? You said that's the earliest.
We could have it on May 12th.
That's a Thursday.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I mean, it could be a very short meeting just focused on this. We could have another meeting later on anyways.
You
Through
mean
the
just
chair,
focused
I may
on-
not be available. I'm not available on May 12th.
Okay. So if you're suggesting just focused on Chamberlain Wayland Scenic Road, not focused on this topic of the Wilson Solar. So just to clarify. Okay, so I want to hear, or actually show of hands, because that's easiest. Who is available on the 12th? Okay, that's 5. Who's available on the 17th? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Who's available on the 18th? 4, 5, okay. And who's available on the 19th? 6, 7. Fran's like halfway.
I'm
6
traveling, so yeah, I mean, I can probably do it.
So the best one was the 17th. So, and that would conflict with the select board meeting, but I think that that's doable. So the 17th sounded like it was best for the vast majority. So I think that we should hold the next meeting on the 17th. We should ask that the Wilson Street Solar be, on the agenda, and that the Chamberlain Whalen Scenic Road is on the agenda that night.
Sounds like a plan.
If we want to do a site visit at Wilson Street, we obviously have to get to a point where John can contact them and see whether or not they're available on one of these Saturdays.
So through the chair, I'm just going to throw this out there. They're a Canadian company. I doubt they have a project manager in Massachusetts anymore. So there may not be a representative from the developer available to attend.
Okay. Well, do people want to do a site visit without the developer there on Saturday morning, the 14th? And are we allowed to go onto their property?
I can reach out to them and see if they're available and request that the planning board goes out on the property, or if they can get somebody to be out there. I just don't know what their availability is.
Okay.
I don't know what good it would do if they weren't there to show us what they've done and why they've done it.
Well, we can see what.
Again, it's the same thing, is if they're not going to attend these meetings, again, they may just not let us go, or they may not show up. And I agree with Jen there, we have to see what the rationale behind it. That's why I think we need to be insistent that they must attend our next meeting. If they don't, then we know exactly where they stand. And then we have obviously the cease and desist is not an option, but we have a little bit more leverage with the building inspector saying, we've reached out, we've done all we could.
Yeah.
I think a site walk is beneficial because we've done that in the past. We have an image of the place and then we can ask them questions after the fact. Right? That's worked before.
I would agree with Dave on that. I think, going to the site and having visibility to some of the lines, the buffer zone where that's been trespassed, according to Mr. Shambo, I think it provides context. And I think then when they do put we look at the original plans, you can see where some of the differences lie. So regardless of whether they can show up or not, I do think that there's significant value to Dave's point of having a site walk.
So logistically, can we get in, or do we need them to unlock a gate or something?
There's no gate.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, they haven't installed the gate yet?
Could we get Mike Shepherd there?
I have to see. I don't know what his schedule is.
Let's tentatively schedule this for Saturday, May 14th
At 9 a.m.
at 9 a.m.
I thought you said, okay, for 14th. Okay, got it.
Could I make a comment?
Yes.
I'm just offering that if there is a challenge, I'm inviting you to be walking my property if you want to, so you can see what's there if you can't get on their property. So if that's helpful, I'm just offering it.
Thank you, Mr. Shambo. I think that's an excellent option. And in the meantime, John's got a lot of things on his to-do list. I keep adding to it. John can check to see whether or not we can go onto their property, whether or not they can be there with us, whether or not the zoning enforcement officer can be there, and whether or not they will attend our May 17th meeting. Okay.
And hopefully the neighbors will join us as well, right, Madam Chair?
That would be great. Yes, absolutely. Mr. Shambo. And Mr. Shambo, you're at, what was that again, 15 Wilson Street?
Yes, I'm at 15 Wilson Street, right next to them.
Okay.
So we have Saturday, just to summarize, Madam Chair, we have Saturday, the 14th for the site walk, and Tuesday, the 17th for the planning board meeting.
Yes, Tuesday, the 17th at 7 p.m. Board.
Through the chair, is that going to be an in-person meeting? I know that there has been discussion about moving to in-person.
Well, I was gonna leave that sticky subject for Gary to figure out, but
We can continue going remote.
Yeah, we can.
I know
I
Ron
think-
wants to meet everybody in person, but we can continue going remote until July.
I think,
I think we
Ron,
should just at least wait at least one more meeting, then we can
One
discuss
more
it at the
meeting.
next meeting.
yeah.
And Ryan can always stop by at each of our houses. He's welcome in my house.
Yeah. And actually, Madam Chair, and I noticed that the town now has pretty good facility for hybrid type of meeting as well, with camera and screens and everything. So
Is at HCAM or is that at Town Hall?
at town hall, actually, when we joined the CPC meeting, it seems like a pretty technically, I mean, well facilitated hybrid meeting location.
Oh, good. Okay. Good to know. Thank you. So the next meeting, we will continue to have that on Zoom. It's possible that subsequent meetings will be in person. So, you know, I might have to stop wearing sweatshirts to meetings now. So, shoot, and slippers. Okay. I think that's about it for this topic. So do you have any energy left, John, for the presentation to us?
Sure.
Okay. Thank you.
Just got to find the file. Can everyone see this clearly, or does it need to be bigger?
Nope, looks good to me.
It's good for me.
All right. So MBTA Communities, I'm going to do a much more informal presentation for you all. Feel free to stop me and ask questions, though hopefully all the questions will be answered throughout this presentation. So MBTA Communities is a initiative that is part of the Housing Choice Initiative that has been brought forward by Governor Baker. And the intent is to build more housing, not just affordable housing, but more housing along transportation corridors. So an MBTA community is basically any town in Massachusetts that is served by the MBTA system. If it's got a train station, commuter rail station, bus station, subway station, or is adjacent to a city or town that has one of those, it's basically considered an MBTA community. So this is a map of all of the communities. Obviously, inner core served by subway or light rail and bus and commuter rail to a certain extent. And then you can see the dark green ones are the commuter rail ones, and then the light green ones are the adjacent communities. So a significant portion of eastern and central Massachusetts is considered MBTA communities. So keep that in mind.
John, can you just point to Hopkinton? Point to Hopkinton. I can't read that small. Great, thank you.
Hopkinton's right here. So just to be clear, what I'm going to tell you, the requirements for Hopkinton are going to apply to essentially every other community that is shaded here.
So, John, sorry, I won't ask many more questions, but why are we?
As many questions as you have.
Why are we on the commuter rail?
Because we are within half a mile of the commuter rail line in Southborough.
Thank you.
So I'm not going to go through this. This is just the regulatory background. It gives the actual language enabling this process. So the MBTA Communities Initiative really focuses on zoning, and it requires these communities to create a zoning district or an overlay district requiring a certain amount of housing within that district. It does not require the units to actually be constructed in order for the town to be compliant. It just requires that the zoning be in place. And it is not related to Chapter 40B. It is not related to affordable housing. You can include affordable housing, but it does not mandate affordable housing in it. And then if you are an MBTA community and you do not comply, you risk losing funds from certain programs. Those three programs are the Housing Choice Initiative, the Local Capital Projects Fund, and the MassWorks Infrastructure Program. The biggest
John,
one,
before you continue, John, just one quick question. So I don't want you to go back to the map, but then the map, we were the dark green. So things you're talking about are only for the dark green communities or even the light green and the blue, or is it just
all
for the dark
communities.
green?
All communities that were shaded. Yeah. So there's, when we go through, there's a formula that establishes how many housing units and what density they need to be at based on those different color schemes.
Okay, thank you.
John, can I ask a quick question? Are you going to elaborate a little bit for understanding what are these eligibility?
I am.
Mean?
I will. So right now we're in the very beginning part of it. So compliance for us is doing the presentations for the select board, submission of that form, which I did after the meeting with the select board, and then a submission of a current parcel map, which has already been taken care of. So we were not one of the communities that needed to update their maps. So at this point, we should be compliant with this regulation. And I think that's for 2022. We don't know when the next deadline is going to be. It's probably going to be sometime in 2023 or 2024 when you'd actually have to have the zoning appear before town meeting. But right now we're still learning everything. There's still only guidelines. The state hasn't fully fleshed this out. So hopefully things change for the better, but maybe they stay the same, but we're going to get a better understanding as to what this is actually going to entail. So just for a background, Hopkinton really only relies on MassWorks funding out of those three. We can become a Housing Choice Initiative certified community. I don't believe we are yet. But just for perspective as to what we would get from MassWorks, we got $5 million for Legacy Farms Road North. We got $500,000 for the engineering and design of the Main Street corridor, and $3 million for the engineering, land acquisitions, and all the other stuff that's going along with the Main Street corridor. At town meeting, there's going to be an article about a potential MWRA connection for water. So that could be funded by MassWorks. Any affordable housing developments that the town initiates as a local initiative could be funded with infrastructure. The infrastructure work for that could be funded through MassWorks. And then any other infrastructure projects that may come up in the future can get funded by MassWorks. So there's, not an insignificant amount of money that could be off the table for Hopkinton if we don't comply with this. So why Hopkinton right now? We are within half a mile of the Southborough train station, so we are considered a served community. We will need to do the zoning. There is a provision that you can split the zoning district in two areas if you have a certain area that may fit already the requirements of that zoning district, of the required zoning district. I'll go into it a little bit more detail later, but that's likely not going to happen in Hopkinton. So we also have the Ashland train station nearby, but that's not within half a mile of Hopkinton. So we only have to comply with the Southborough train station half-mile radius. Just for your visual reference, this is the land in Hopkinton that is within half a mile, this little triangle portion down here. And just so I had this question from somebody after this presentation, Southborough will also have to comply with this. So there will also need to be a zoning district on the Southborough side that meets certain requirements. This is just a little bit more of what's going on. So the concern that we have internally is that this is going to be a zoning district in name only. It's not really going to ever be built out. You have Carbones, which is almost 11 acres. This little parcel is not going to be included because it's part of Hopkinton State Forest. This is the Trevor Lane community. This is all part of the Turkey Ridge recent approval. So they're going to want to build what they can build. And then these are all single family homes. There's a requirement in this, the guidelines that say you cannot develop a parcel less than 5 acres as part of this. So for any of these lots to be developed, they would have to join with another lot because you can't develop, a multifamily development on 1.35 acres. You would need a 5 acre contiguous piece of land. So the real potential here is this is Curtis Smithson's property up here, and I'm sure he doesn't like me telling everybody where he lives, but the real potential is the Carbonis property, and then, you know, potentially if Curtis decides to sell some land, they could do a development here, but otherwise it's going to be almost prohibitive to do some kind of development over here and all over here. So we're going to have an overlay district that may never get built, which, you know, depending on how your perspective on this, may be a good thing, maybe a bad thing. So for this initiative, you need to have a district of reasonable size, and that is defined as at least 50 acres. So all of those parcels in that area that I just showed you that would be developable, I think makes up about 60 and change. The district needs to have a minimum density of 15 units per acre. You cannot restrict by age. So it's intended to be family-friendly developments. It needs to be legally and practically allowed. So like you can't basically have an entire wetland area be the district, because obviously you're not going to be able to build on wetlands. And then there's another formula that goes in that really customizes the number of units and the density to the town itself. So while 15 units per acre is a minimum, Hopkinton, they go by the total number of housing units in town plus a multiplier based on Shadu, what you were saying, what the colors mean, based on that classification that you are. So since we are a served community of the commuter rail, the multiplier is 15%. So we would actually need to have 997 units within this district. And what that means is the district either needs to be larger than 50 acres to do 15 units per acre, or you have to have a higher density. So in order for Hopkinton to comply, you'd have to have a district of at least 66.5 acres or have a density of 20 units per acre for a 50-acre district. Does that make sense? And I see everybody shaking their heads, and we had many of these webinars with a bunch of different communities, and everyone was doing the same thing. You need to realize it's not just Hopkinton that's doing this. It's every community that was shaded is doing some form of this. And the ones that are within the inner core are a much higher percentage as well. So they're going to be doing a lot of units, or required to do a lot of units. So this is one thing that we looked at that kind of didn't really pan out. So you can split the district into potentially two areas. The problem is the other area needs to be accessible to the train station for this to work. So we were looking at the downtown business district, because residential units, there's no limit on the density of residential units. However, residential can only be on the upper floors of a mixed-use building. And these have to be done by right. So you can't require a special permit. You can require a site plan, but it can only look at certain things. I'll go into that a little bit later. But essentially, you have to have at least 50% of the land area within the half mile of this train station. So you have to have a district of 25 acres at least in that area that I just showed you. And then the other 25 acres could be elsewhere on the town property, but there's no access. There are restrictions to the development of residential downtown. So because of those things, we really don't think that downtown would qualify as an approved district. So it looks like Hopkinton will have to do the entire district within half a mile of the train station. We're not going to be able to split it.
Hey, John, could I ask a quick question here?
Sure.
So a little bit of a confusion here. So these, as you put down, 997 units or approximately 20 units per acre and stuff like that. Is that meant to be new units and new property, or can we account what already exists in that area?
I mean, it's a density of that. So if you are leaving the units there, obviously they can count, but that's not, the units that are there are not going to make that much of a difference, to be honest.
But again, like, because what you have there, how many units are there currently? Like, like, again, we're like looking at 997. I'm thinking, well, we got what, 20?
Maybe.
Okay, so we're so it's a huge change. Okay, and so that means we need to build, or density-wise, 977 units? No.
We have to allow for zoning we have to establish a zoning district that allows for that type of development by right. We do not need to construct these units. And that's why I was saying it appears at this point like this will probably be a zoning district in name only and never actually acted upon, because there is existing development there. The only place that you could potentially do it is Carbones if it gets redeveloped, because it's a larger piece of land that may be open to that type of development. But having these single family homes be developed as multifamily is likely not going to happen, because you would have to have multiple families sell their property in order to do that.
Yeah,
you can't do it on less than 5 acres, right?
Yeah.
So John, then the existing structures don't really matter, right? It's just the zoning going forward.
No, the existing structures don't matter. It's just that we need to. This is all really focused on creating a zoning district, not creating the units themselves.
Right.
Yeah. One thing that was because they have to be over 5 acres to count towards it, and you need 25 acres within the half-mile radius. Like all the individual lots could be part of the district. It's just they can't be developed unless they're 5 acre parcels.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. Essentially.
So John, question. Why is the state allowing such a thing to happen if there is no hope of any kind of housing getting built in that kind of a district? Meaning every town could be doing something similar.
So Hopkinton is a unique case, right? In certain towns, it may be advantageous to buy up that land and build higher density around the train stations. I'm thinking Watertown, Newton, maybe even Natick. Grafton, for example, has the train station right by Tufts, and there's a lot of vacant land around there. So maybe Grafton would be able to develop something. I know there's those brick buildings that are currently being redeveloped. I don't know what for, but potentially those brick buildings on the other side of the train station could be developed as part of this, because Grafton is going to also be required to do this type of thing. Hopkinton and Southborough are in a unique place because they're really already developed with single family homes around the train stations. So it may not be reasonable for developers to buy up all that land and then put a multifamily development. But in certain situations, it may be reasonable to do that. So rather than having a custom development scheme for each town, they're kind of just doing this across the board type of thing. And if it works in some towns, it works. If it doesn't work in other towns, then it doesn't work. And who knows? So I really don't know their thinking behind it, but that's where I would come from if I were doing it.
And John, maybe it makes sense for Hopkinton in 100 or 150 years from now.
Exactly. Right. Yeah, exactly. When Hopkinton, so the zoning would be in place for when the demand happens, and global climate change melts all the ice caps and everything is flooded, and Hopkinton is now a coastal city that everyone wants to live in. Who knows? It's getting the infrastructure, the soft infrastructure in place for when this is actually needed. Okay, where am I? Does Hopkinton currently comply? Likely no. So we looked at Legacy Farms and the Windsor at Hopkinton to see if those, as the denser developments in town, would comply. Unfortunately, Legacy Farms was developed under a master plan special permit and under a separate zoning district, so that would not comply because it's not by right. And Windsor at Hopkinton was a 40B, so that wouldn't comply. In addition, as part of the permit, Windsor at Hopkinton limits the number of bedrooms. So you can't limit the number of bedrooms and still comply. So both of those developments, being the more dense ones in Hopkinton, would not comply with this district. So we can't use those areas as like a set aside district that's not within the half mile. And then I already spoke about the downtown business district and how it's really not accessible, and there's no sidewalk from along Cedar Street down to the train station. So it's really, it would likely be struck down if we tried to get that as a district. So some other technical details, I probably went over a bunch of these things. You can't limit the number of bedrooms, the size of the units. They've got to be family friendly, that type of thing. Needs to be as of right. You can do site plan review, but you can only look at, I think they stipulated vehicular access and circulation on a site, architectural design of a building, and screening of adjacent properties. So everything else you wouldn't be able to really do. We would likely be able to maintain the stormwater management permit requirements because it would be a development over 1 acre. And so you would handle stormwater management through that, but you really wouldn't have all of the tools in your belt on a site plan review if something like this came about. And you can do an overlay district. It doesn't have to be base zoning. You can do an overlay district on top of the underlying zoning. That is perfectly fine. And then, as I said, any portion of the overlay district that's less than 5 contiguous acres would not count towards compliance. So you can't have like fragmented 4 acre lots that add up to 50 acres, right? You'd have to have all contiguous, at least 5 acre sections. So next steps, really kind of at a stopping point here because we've already had the meeting. We've already filled out the form. We don't need to send in a new map. So now we just need to figure out what this district would look like in the future when we get more information from the state. And then once we figure that out, then we can begin the town meeting process to get that zoning district approved. The one question that we still have that we need to answer is, as part of the Housing Choice Initiative, the state allows for certain zoning changes that further the I forget how they say this, further the goals of the Housing Choice Initiative. So when they're housing focused, will be reduced to a simple majority rather than a 2/3 majority vote. I would assume this would be contained under that provision, but we need to get clarity on that. So this may not need to hit the 2/3 threshold at town meeting. It may need to hit the 50 plus 1%. Any questions?
Well, thank you. That was really very, very thorough and interesting. Thank you.
Yeah.
John,
Yep.
John, I have a comment, please. So to me, it makes sense for the planning board to get moving on this as soon as possible, even though there's a lot of unknowns, because we know how hard it is to get things in town meeting and to have all, there's probably going to be some public sessions, right? And people need to be on board with it. Just, not really on board with it, but just more aware, right? Awareness of it. So that's just a comment. I think even though it's unknown, it's better to move quicker than slower.
Right. The issue is we don't want to get too into the weeds with it without getting more information from the state. So when we filled out this form, one of the questions was, what technical assistance from the state would you like? And there were a bunch of different options, and we filled out that a model bylaw would be really helpful. Yeah. So if they draft a model bylaw, that would be a good starting point for the planning board, because then we would know what we would need to have to comply because the state would have given it to us. And then we can tailor it to Hopkinton and start the discussions from there, rather trying to create something from scratch, have it be completely off base from what the state actually wants because we haven't gotten a lot of guidelines, and then have to start the process over.
John, to clarify, are we expecting any action from the planning board in near short term?
No.
Can I just make a general comment? I think there's this assumption that the future funding would justify the risk of such a district to Hopkinton. I look at it and think, if this district existed and actually got built, the cost to the town would far outweigh any future funding we're going to get from MassWorks. Like, to me, this is there's many towns here that will never create such a district because the risk is too high. Like, if you added roughly 1,000 housing units with unlimited bedrooms to Hopkinton, the impact on the school and the costs and the taxes far outweighs several $1 million over a 10-year period from MassWorks. It's like the math doesn't work to take on the risk. This to me looks like maybe it never could be built, but the risk is too high. If it ever was built, you're talking about the amount of housing units as Legacy Farms, like 1,000 housing units with unlimited bedrooms. Like, this is just something we should walk very carefully around, because I would, like, at first glance, I would never support this this type of zoning district.
So one thing I do want to reiterate is that while Hopkinton is a desirable place to live and has a desirable school district, there are all these other communities that are also going to have to comply that may be considered more desirable or have a more desirable school district, and maybe they will not comply. But usually the inner core towns rely more heavily on MassWorks funding than Hopkinton does. So they would be more encouraged to comply than maybe a Hopkinton would, and would have the more desire. They would be the more desirable destinations for this type of development. So while Hopkinton, it would have a huge impact on Hopkinton, and hopefully I'm not eating my words later, I would assume those communities would be the first to implement and have the development occur before Hopkinton does, because of those factors.
Yeah.
So I want you to just keep in mind, this development probably isn't going to happen in Hopkinton in the next few years, right? There's going to be a lot of changes statewide that are going to take place before any type of development like this happens in Hopkinton, just because of the financial reasons and the other communities that also need to comply with this that may have a better chance of having this type of development happen for various reasons.
So I believe that, you know, as the planning board, our responsibility is to put together a reasonable bylaw to comply with this, and then take it to town meeting. And then, Rob, your argument is an appropriate argument for town meeting to discuss. And I look forward to actually seeing numbers that that talk about the cost to the community versus the potential benefit from these various programs, because you know, I would really love to see the pluses and minuses in making that decision at the town meeting. But we do have to put together a bylaw for the town to vote on. So.
I guess that's the question. Do we? That's the question I have.
I think it's our responsibility to put a bylaw together. Not to make the decision for the town that we're not going to comply. We can't make that decision.
Right. I think Mary's in the right path here in terms of putting a bylaw together. I think, to Rob's point, the board doesn't necessarily have to support that bylaw.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we could say that, you know, we're putting this forward, but the planning board is not recommending that we do it.
Yeah.
And that Rob brings up some excellent points that we'll vet out and discuss in detail. Certain passages that Mary is right. I mean, this is our fiduciary, I think, responsibility to the town, educate them, and allow the town, the members of the town, to ultimately make the vote up or down.
Yeah, I agree.
Hey, John, what's that big gray area there? Doesn't the commuter rail go through there?
This one or this one?
No, that one. Yeah, second one.
This one?
Yeah.
So Boston is not subject to the law because Boston is not subject to Chapter 40A.
That's interesting.
Yes, Boston is not subject to the zoning act.
But they're subject to a lot of other things.
Through the chair, Mary. That it's an interesting conversation right now that we're having, and it might be worthwhile for planning board to submit this along with a cost analysis. Maybe we could get the financial board, you know, the finance committee, to come in with the pluses and the minuses of what it would be for the town if we were to adopt such a bylaw or not. It sounds like we have to. Am I reading that right, John? We have to adopt this?
You have to adopt it if you want to be in compliance and be eligible for those 3 funding sources.
Okay, so I guess there's a lot more discussion that needs to go forward.
Mm-hmm. But I like that idea, Jane, that, you know, we tap into the expertise elsewhere in town to get some real numbers.
Yeah, we've got some really talented people in this town. I think we should use their brains.
Yep. Absolutely.
I like the idea of building scenarios and analysis. I think that'll help us. And quick question, John, would it be worth exploring the other two benefits that were mentioned, or they wouldn't be applicable for us in near future?
It's not that they're not applicable, it's just that we have not obtained funding from them.
But would we be benefited if those open
Potentially. Potentially, yes.
In what form? Do you have like one-liner
So,
for it?
I'm not familiar with the local capital, I forget what local capital projects fund. So I don't know what you would be able to do from there, but I would assume it would be infrastructure related or other capital project type things. The Housing Choice Initiative is really focused on housing development. So if we wanted to do any affordable housing initiatives or any other type of housing development type stuff, that would be what they'd be looking for.
Thank you.
Thank you, John. I really appreciate this. Although I don't completely understand it and still, but
I don't think any of us do.
Could I ask one more question?
Go ahead, Rob.
Is the funding you outline there, is that over the last 10 years or just in history? I was just
So
curious.
MassWorks is not a super old program. So that's the funding we've received from MassWorks in its lifetime. I don't know how old MassWorks is, but it's not, I would maybe venture a guess it's not even 10 years old.
Okay. So just for rough numbers, our town budget, I think, is about 80 million, I think. And we've received about 8 million over about 10-year period. So it's fairly low. It's like 1% of funds that would be at risk versus, at least from my perspective. I think we can talk about it more, but I think everybody understands my perspective.
Yeah. Thanks, Rob.
I think Rob, I think our budget's about 100 million now. 2020 it was 93 million.
Yeah, yeah,
it's 103.8 million.
It's over 100.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think there's more complexity to this that we really need to get some hard numbers and properly evaluate it before we as planning board can vote on it, before we as a town can vote on it, et cetera. So, yep.
Through you, Madam Chair, I have a question.
Go ahead.
Should I make a motion to end the meeting? Is this our last item?
No, this is, we have some minutes. So
Okay.
if we're done discussing this, let's move on to the minutes.
That was my very unpolite way of saying we're going to have lots more opportunities to talk about this, right?
We definitely are. Yep. Okay. So minutes of March 21st. Does anyone have any comments on them? Any edits?
Good to me.
Okay. So I'll entertain a motion to approve them.
So moved. Second, Ron Prefer.
Okay. And voting, Ron?
Ron Prefer, yes.
Sundar?
Sundar Sivaraman, yes.
Jane?
Jane Moran, yes.
Dave?
Dave Paul, yes.
Shahidul?
Shahidul Manan, yes.
Rob?
Rob Benson, yes.
And Fran?
Randy Young, yes.
And Mary Larson Marlowe is a yes. And the other set of minutes is from April 4th. Any edits from those or those? No? Okay. Then I will entertain a motion to approve.
Ron Prefer moved.
Shahidul Manan, second.
Thank you. And voting, Ron?
Ron Prefer, yes.
Sundar?
Sundar Sivaraman, yes.
Jane?
Jane Moran, yes.
Dave?
Dave Paul, yes.
Shahidul?
Shahidul Manan, yes.
Rob?
Rob Benson, yes.
And Fran?
Randy Young, yes.
Mary Larson Marlowe is a yes. Sundar, how many more meetings will we have you for?
End of May, so at least so the one on the 17th.
Okay.
Or the 18th.
And possibly one more if we manage to squeeze one in. Okay. Sounds good. Well, I just didn't want you to sneak away without us
Nope,
being
no
able to
problem.
say something. All right, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Ron Prefer, so moved.
Edelman on second.
Thank you. Ron, say your name.
Ron Prefer, yes.
Sundar,
Sundar Sivaraman, yes.
Jane,
Jane Moran, yes.
Dave,
Dave Paul, yes.
Shahidul,
Edelman on yes.
Rob,
Rob Benson, yes.
Fran,
Randy Young, yes.
and Mary Larson Marlowe is a yes. Good night, everyone.
Night.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Great
Mary.
meeting. Thank you.